I'm Mark Golub, and on July 1st of this year, 3 beautiful Israeli boys were laid to rest, together, side by side, in a cemetery in the Israeli city of Modi'in. Eyal Yifra, 19 years old, Gilad Sha'ar, 16 years old, and Naftali Frankel, 16 years old, and also an American citizen. They'd all become the focus of national attention when they'd been kidnapped on June 12th. And then their bodies were discovered 18 days later in a shallow grave in a field near Hebron. Literally, tens of thousands of Israelis came from far and wide to stand in reverence and in sorrow at their gravesites. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Shimon Peres spoke words of comfort to the families and to all assembled. And the Jewish people worldwide mourned with them. In the Jewish tradition, the first 7 days of mourning after burial, the Shiva period, embodies the most intense time of family grieving, which takes place in the midst of the entire community, which offers their presence and companionship at a time of immense loss. And then the following 23 days complete the first 30 days of mourning, which, while less intense, also embody a profound element of grief, though far less communal in nature. These 23 days end with Shloshim, which means 30, and refers to the 30th day when this second period of mourning comes to an end. And often in the Jewish community, memorial services are held on or around Shloshim. Since Eyal, Gilad, and Naftali were laid to rest on July 1st, August 1st marks their Shloshim. And to honor them, and in solidarity with their families and with the Jewish people of Israel, we would like to play for you now a memorial service that took place in New York City in memory of Eyal Yifra, Gilad Sha'ar, and Naftali Frankel.
Since the heinous abduction of Eyal Efrach, Gilad Sha'ar, and Naftali Frankel, Hashem Yinkom Domam, our community has been united in prayer, united in hope. This evening as we gather, we are united once again, united in grief, united in pain. Our hands are outstretched to the parents, grandparents, and loved ones of the boys. Rachel Frankel, Naftali's mother, said several times that we just want to hug them again. The brutal murderers in cold blood of these innocent teens mercilessly ended that dream. It is now our obligation to virtually hug Rachel and the other grieving mothers and fathers. As we extend warm, loving embraces, to the Yifrach, Sha'ar, and Franco families, we also raise our voices to the nations of the world to say enough. Enough terrorism, enough savagery, enough slaying of guiltless children. Hamas and the other death cults in the Middle East and around the world must be rooted out by civilized society. The silence of all too many countries in response to this atrocity is chilling. And Israel should take whatever action it deems necessary in order to punish those responsible for this outrage and protect its citizens, old and young, from Hamas and the other ruthless terror groups whose cruelty knows no bounds. Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali were kidnapped on June 12th, and their lifeless bodies were found on June 30th. 18 harrowing days. 18, as many here know, is the Hebrew equivalent of the word chai, life. Gilad and Naphtali were students in a yeshiva whose name was Mikor Chaim, source of life. May the memory of these slain, martyred boys serve as an inspiration to us to do all that we can to ensure and protect the life of the Jewish people, of the Jewish nation, of the Jewish state of Israel. As the prophet Shmuel foretold, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The destiny of Israel, the destiny of the Jewish people, will not be a falsehood. Indeed, Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives. Utehei Nishmot Eyal, Gilad Michael, V'Yakov Naphtali, Tzururot B'Tzor HaChayim. So may the souls of Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali be bound up in eternal life.
I've often thought that terrorism is just another way of saying abject indifference to human life. Our response is to combat coldness with excessive warmth, to banish selfishness and replace it with an overabundance of generosity, to meet indifference to human life with radical empathy and radical compassion. Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali were students in a yeshiva. They filled their days and their hours with the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvos. What better way to generate nechama? What better way to honor their lives and perpetuate their legacies than to commit to filling our days and our hours with more words of Torah and gestures of kindness? So allow me to offer a tefillah, prayer composed by my friend and colleague Rabbi Daniel Friedman in memory of Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali. Avinu Malkeinu, El Elohei Aruchos L'chol Basar, Hamtzei Mincha Nechona Tachas Kanfei Ashchina, B'ma'alos Kiddushim U'Tzearim K'Zohar HaRakia Masirim, Es Nishmos Eyal ben Uri, Gilad Michael ben Ophir, Yaakov Naphtali ben Avraham Ron, Shenirtzachu al Kiddush Shemecha. El HaShomea Kol Dmei Banenu Tzoakim Min HaAdama, Me'aked Asam Al Tisalam Estamam HaShafuch Tenakeim, Al Achsarim Lo Terachem, L'netzach Lo Nishkachem. El HaRufei L'Shvurei Lev, Moched Ma'os Me'al Kol Panim, Es Mishpachos Tenachem, L'Rega Katan Al Tazveim, Migates Al Maves Tefalteim, Al Mei Menuchos Tenahaleim. L'chein bal harachamim tasdirein b'seser kanafecha li'olamim. B'tzror achayim es nishmasam. Adonai hu nachalasam. V'yanuchu v'shalom al mishkavam v'nomar amen. Our Father, our King, O God, who is close to the hearts of all men, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of your presence amongst the holy and pure who shine bright as the heavens. To the souls of Yaakov Naphtali ben Avram Ron, Ayal ben Uri, Gilad Michael ben Ophir, who were martyred in the sanctification of your name. Lord, who hears the voices of our children calling out from the earth, turn not away from their plight and let not their cry be silenced. Let them never be forgotten. Lord, who gives strength to the brokenhearted and wipes away the tears of those who are crestfallen, may you give solace to these grieving families. Abandon them not for even a moment. Rescue them from the valley of the shadow of death and lead them among tranquil waters. Lord of mercy, shelter them under your protective wings for all eternity. Bind the souls of these boys in the bonds of eternal life. The Lord is their inheritance. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Mizmor Chaf Gimel. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai roi lo achsar. Bino deshe yarbiteni al mei menucho yinaleni. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech v'gei tzal mavet lo yirara ki atayim adi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yinachamuni. Taroch lefanai shulchan neged torai. Dishanta v'Hashem en roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni ko yimei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai la'orech yamim.
Tehillim Tet Vav. Mizmor LeDavid. Adonai miya gur ba'alecha. Mi yishkon b'har kadshecha. Holech tamim ufa'el tzedek. V'dover emet b'levavo. Lo ragel al shono. Lo asa l're'ehu ra'am. V'cherfa lo nasa al krovo. Nivze be'enav nim'as. Ve'ed yirei Adonai yichabed. Nishma laharam v'lo yamir. Kaspo lo natan b'nashecha. V'shochad al naki. Lo lakach. Ose ela lo yamut leolam.
Tilim Kuf Kafalev. Shir Malo, Design Elrim, Ein Yavo Ezri, Ezri Meim Adonai Oseh, Shamayim Varetz, Al Yitain Lamod Raglecha, Al Yanun, Shomrecha, Hine Lo Yinun Belo Isha, Shomer Yisrael, Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Tilcha, Yad Yeviecha, Yomam Hashem Shlo Yekeka, V'yareach Balayla, Adonai Yishmorcha Mikora, Yishmor et Navshecha, Adonai Yishmor Tilcha Vuacha, Me'ata V'yad Olam.
Let me say first, all of our thoughts and prayers are with the families and loved ones of these fine young men, Eyal Yifra, Gilad Sha'ar, Naphtali Frankel. They were taken from us far too soon, and when these young men first went missing and we saw their photos, I know that just about every one of us saw the faces of our children in them. It could have been one of our children that this happened to. Innocent young men in the flower of life, cruelly taken from us. To think that such a callous act could be done to such innocent young men is unconscionable. May their memory be a blessing. Now, it is quite clear that this was done by Hamas. And this ought to be a lesson to the nations of the world, including our own, The Palestinian Authority made a terrible mistake by linking up with terrorists. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel says it, so does the United States, so do just about all the civilized nations of the world. And unfortunately, when you associate with terrorists, they become emboldened. They're like schoolyard bullies. If you show them a hand of peace, they cut it off. And that's what happened here. So in light of this tragedy and these revelations, 3 things should happen. First, the Palestinian Authority, in the name of those who were killed and for so many other reasons, must break its ties with Hamas and this coalition government, so-called coalition government, immediately. Second, our government should pressure them to do so. And third, if the Palestinian Authority does not, we in Congress should cut off all funding to them. Thank you.
I stand here this evening as a parent united in grief and mourning with Ofer and Bat Galim Sha'ar, Avi and Rachel Frankel, and Uri and Iris Yifrach. For all of us, this unspeakable tragedy feels deeply personal. Both of my sons learned in Israel. One just returned 3 weeks ago after 2 years there. Both attended a yeshiva in the same area as Gilad, Ayal, and Naftali, and both frequently hitchhiked, tramped from the exact location as the murdered boys. As parents, we all hope and pray for the same thing for our children. Lives of peace and happiness and security. It is indescribably painful that such is not to be for Gilad, Ayal, and Naftali. When we go to a shiva, a house of mourning, we extend the traditional words of consolation, Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar aveli Tzion Yerushalayim. May the omnipresent comfort all of you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. And even if only one person is sitting shiva, we still say, Hamakom yinachem etchem in the plural. May the omnipresent comfort all of you. And we do so because Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, all Jews are responsible for one another. Your pain is my pain. Your loss is my loss. In these weeks of waiting, from the first news of the abduction to this outpouring of grief tonight, we have stood together as a people and a community, reaching out any way we could, praying together, comforting one another, and hoping against hope. Let us continue to come together as a community to show the world that Gilad, Naftali, and Ayal will not be forgotten. In their names, let us stand stronger and let us work harder to take care of one another. Let us continue always to remember that the fate of all Jews around the world is interconnected. Yehei Zechram Baruch.
It's a pointless exercise to try and speculate on the motivations of a mind so sick that it would conceive the barbarity of kidnapping and killing children. But one thing we can say for sure is that if their goal was to divide us, they have utterly failed. The people of Israel now are more united than at any point in history, united in revulsion to this act, as are Jewish communities around the world across the spectrum, especially here in New York. But we're joined by people of conscience of all backgrounds and nationalities and faiths everywhere who have reaffirmed the belief that whether children are in Nigeria or Israel or on the streets of New York City, we have an obligation to keep them safe. And we've all been inspired by the example of the families of Ayal, Gilad, and Naphtali, who have shown such love and strength and faith. And I know that their light will shine on us for many days to come. And now I've been asked to read the prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu shebashamayim, Tzu Yisrael v'goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit tzmichat golatenu, Hanein aleha ve'evrat chastecha, Ufos aleha sukat shlomecha, Ushlach orcha ve'amitcha, L'rasheha sareha ve'yoatseha, V'taknem be'etza tova milfanecha, Chazek et yedei meginei eretz kadshenu, V'hanchilem Eloheinu, Yeshua v'ateret nitzachon teratreim, V'natata shalom ba'aretz v'simchat olam leyoshveha. Amen. And now in English, our Father in heaven, Rock and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, the first manifestation of the approach of our redemption. Shield it with your loving kindness, envelop it in your peace, and bestow your light and truth upon its leaders, ministers, and advisors, and grace them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land, grant them deliverance, and adorn them in a mantle of victory. Ordain peace in the land, and grant its inhabitants eternal happiness. Amen.
I think the one thing that brings us all together is not so much our religion or color, but the universal experience we have in witnessing the birth of a child and recognizing that this miracle enters this world without hatred, without animosity, without jealousy, without even knowing that in this world people can hate so much that they can destroy other people's children as though they were not miracles of God and not human beings. There's so many ways that people have to determine who are their friends and the difficulties in negotiations. But when it is proven that the person or the nation or the leaders that you are talking and attempt to reach in peace have already openly said that their mission is to destroy you, it's difficult for me to find the language to understand what do you think would come out of an agreement if people have already committed to destroy all that you believe in. And when people say that's not me that's doing it, but it's people that I can't control that's responsible for these horrible things, you would think that one way you could find some credibility is that they would separate themselves from these horrible people who call themselves their partners. But this last incident defines how anyone can have any trust or confidence in people that can snatch life away from a child that had never caused them any harm. How someone could see it and not feel compelled to stop this atrocity. How people can know it and not be outraged that this could happen to children, and that people can ask, please sit with me to further discuss peace. So we're not here really mourning Jewish children. We're mourning the concept of the beginning of what could be the way our civilization is going. If people that we have to deal with have no concept of the pain that they can cause to so many human beings who never harmed them, never knew they existed, if they can snatch the life out of these people, and the whole world is silent because they didn't know these kids, they didn't know their language, they didn't know where they came from, it would seem that we as Americans have had enough experience in believing that what happens to someone else's children could very easily happen to our own. So for those of the Jewish faith, please don't consider this an issue that just pains you. It scares and jolts the sense of humanity that all of us have. But whether we're parents or not, we do know that there's a godly experience that when God allows a child to be born, they never expected us to have anything but outrage as to someone who kills God's work, as this has happened.
It is said, "B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu, v'akadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam." We say that during the Passover Seder. In every generation, they rise up against us to destroy us, but God saves us from their hands. But not always, and not everyone. Yesterday, after 18 days of watching and waiting, we heard that our worst fears were realized. The kidnapping and murder of these 3 children is every parent's worst nightmare. As a father, I cannot even imagine what their parents are going through. May the memory of Naftali, Gilad, and Dayal be a blessing, and their families remain in our thoughts and prayers. We are all outraged and disgusted by those who would take the lives of innocent children. These 3 young Israelis were brutally murdered because of who they are and where they live. But hatred of Jews is nothing new. Today, opposition to Israel or to Israeli policies is the new face for a very old hatred. We note the silence and the hypocrisy of much of the world at the murders of Jewish children. We must, of course, stand shoulder to shoulder in support of whatever actions Israel and its leaders may feel compelled to take. But unfortunately, this horrible occurrence is a reminder of the threat Israelis face, and not just Israelis, but increasingly Jews in Paris or Brussels and other places face every day of their lives. Attacks on civilians have become a routine occurrence. Palestinian terrorists have practically invented the idea of attacks on civilians as a routine tactic of warfare here, maintaining a climate of fear and terror and incessant warfare. Israeli families must live at all times with the fact that terrorists call for their violent deaths, with no regard for human life and no attention to whether the target is a child or an old person. As Jews, as parents, and as human beings, we all grieve with Israel for this tremendous loss. May they be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. But above all, let us act in all ways in solidarity with and in support of Israel, so that the rallying cry, Am Yisrael Chai, is not a pious wish, but a statement of fact forever.
Naftali Frankel, Gilad Shair, Eyal Yifrach, seminary students, the pride and joy of their parents and families, our Jewish sons, just trying to make it home. They are home now. and we were left to grieve, to pray for their families, to clutch our children and grandchildren close to us, and to know in the depths of our hearts how precious Naphtali, Gilad, and Ayal were and are. The President called the pain of this loss indescribable. It's worse than that, much worse. Were he a Jew living in Israel, a land where generation upon generation of Jewish mothers and fathers have buried their murdered children, Jewish children who are innocent victims of an endless campaign of savagery and terror aimed at the Jewish state. Perhaps he'd understand more clearly, because he would know, as we know, that Naphtali, Gilad, and Ayal are now walking the path to eternity that countless Jewish children have walked, because they were targets of hatred and acts of unspeakable violence. We won't forget the Avivim school bus massacre of 1970, the Nativ Meir Elementary School massacre of 1974, the Dolphinarium suicide bombings in 2001, the Merkaz Harav Yeshiva shooting in 2008. All of these Jewish children, casualties of a calculated campaign to destroy the seedlings of Israel's future and weaken the resolve of our people. I have a word for this kind of pain. It's called enough. The world has no stomach for war. I say, when will it have no stomach for the killing of Jewish children? When will the leaders of the civilized world waken to the reality that trying to tame savagery with reason is futility? One cannot reason with those who have the capacity to assassinate children. The killers of Naphtali, Gilad, and Ayal have no conscience. They have no soul. They are incapable of choosing peace. They are dangerous terrorists, and as such, must be dealt with accordingly. So again, I call upon the President and the Secretary of State to end their futile efforts and break off negotiations with the terrorist state until it ceases to be a haven and a shield for Hamas, terrorists, and other such organizations. And I say to Washington that the Jewish people will be grieving for our 3 young sons for a long, long time. And we will never forget the children who were taken from us or who killed them. This evening, we have the luxury of grieving without the constant threat of rocket attack. So let us together, with one mind and one heart, pray for the parents and the families of Naphtali Frankel, Gilad Shaer, and Ayal Yifrach. May their memories be a blessing. And let us pledge ourselves to Israel, to its defense, to its survival, and to bringing about the day when a generation of the world's children will say, enough.
As Michael says, I speak here on behalf of the Conference of Presidents and its 50 member organizations. I appreciate the opportunity and thank the JCRC for that and for organizing this important event. Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of the conference, is in Israel. When we learned that the boys had been murdered, we issued a statement which in part said, We have communicated our condolences and solidarity to the families and pray that they will be comforted amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We went on, it is time that the world stand in unity against those who advocate and execute, as well as justify, the murder of innocent young people who were brutally butchered in Israel or anywhere. It cannot be met by indifference or pro forma expressions of sympathy. For too long, the threats against Israel, including missiles and terrorism, have elicited limited responses, with the roles of victims and perpetrators inverted. It must stop. As we try to come to grips with the enormity of this tragedy, we need to move forward. We have no choice. In doing so, we can learn from Mrs. Frankel. A week ago Friday, as she was dealing with the horrendous reality of the kidnapping of her son, she had a call with the leaders of the Rabbinical Council of America. In that call, she thanked the community for its support and urged that the community maintain the unity that she felt and saw. We can also learn from the Sha'ar family, who invited Minister Yair Lapid, a secular Jew, to speak at their son's funeral, and from the words of Minister Lapid, who said in part, "This is not a funeral of a particular population, subgroup, or sector. It isn't one particular group that is grieving this loss. We need another on this day. We need another. We don't need anger. We don't need yet another division among us. Today at this funeral, in the presence of this family, we need love. We need to speak in one language. We need to rediscover the paths that connect us all. If indeed we want to sanctify Gilad's memory, we need to choose what to sanctify: the hostility toward the other or the love for each other, that which divides us or that which binds us, the suspicion or the trust among ourselves. Lastly, we must continue to express our solidarity with the people of Israel and the government of Israel as it faces some very critical decisions. In this way, we will, in Minister Lapid's words, sanctify the memories of Gilad, Yael, and Naftali. Thank you.
I remember as a child going with my father to the cemetery. He would look down at the graves of loved ones and say very simply in Yiddish, "Mizan and Dor, we're here. We didn't forget you." We come here tonight, and once again, in our own way, we say, "Mizan and Dor." We're here as we look at the pictures of these young people. We proclaim the well-known words of a prophet who said, "Ezak elecha chamos," I cry out to you of the violence. We are here to say that Heim shalanu v'anachnu shalahem. They belong to us and we belong to them. And thus was Mizan and Dur to proclaim that no one should demean or diminish their lives by referring to them as settlers, because they are part of our family. Mizan and Dur, we are here tonight to say that the guilty are not only those who perpetrate the evil, but those who permit the perpetrators to permit and perpetrate the evil. Some years ago, a young person was taken from this world and decided before he died he wanted to leave a will. His will simply read as follows: to my family and friends that I leave behind, I make one request: use my years. They say to us tonight, use our years. Do that which we wanted to do. Bring us closer to one another, Jew and non-Jew, decent against the indecent. We stand together with the decent, Mizan and Dor.
I am very sorry that we have to meet here this evening for this occasion. But I am here on behalf of the 700 plus interfaith members that make up the New York State Chaplain Task Force to stand side by side with my fellow members of the clergy and laypersons alike who, like me, believe that injustice to one of our children is an injustice to all of our children. Naphtali, Gilad, and Eyal had bright futures ahead of them. Yet tonight, we gather here because their lives were abruptly, senselessly, and tragically ended. And so I say it is imperative that we do all that we can do to protect our children here and abroad. Those responsible must be brought to justice. Without justice, peace is but a dream. And so we are here to send a clear message. Our children will not be the targets of hate mongers anywhere. We are ready, willing, and able to unite to see that atrocity, or any atrocity of that matter, never happens again. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the families and loved ones of Naphtali and Gilad and Eyal. May their names never be forgotten. Thank you, and God bless you.
As Michael just indicated, I just got off a plane. But I knew where I had to be. There's a time in history where voices of good people must be together. It must not be just the voice of one person from any place or different parts of the world. It's got to be all of us. And when one is struck down, especially when you think of 3 young boys, not doing anything to anybody, not involved in any conflict, just simply hitchhiking, coming home from school as they always do. Then brutally murdered by cowards. Mahatma Gandhi once said, cowards can never be moral. But there must be justice. And we must be the moral ones. And the moral ones will not stand silently when you hear and see evil acts. And what happened to these 3 young boys? All of us in this family, the human family, have to stand up together and say our voices will be heard, and we will not stop until justice is had and peace becomes a reality. My brothers and my sisters, I believe, I can't tell you how. I know as a father of 3 daughters, I don't know how the parents can feel after the loss of their loved one. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but I do know this, that it is incumbent upon us that yet live to stand up for justice
and to make sure that until those that are brought to justice and those who want to continue to perpetuate evil on this earth, we have to be that voice. We have to be the ones that stand strong. We have to be one to say to those who want to do good harm that our voices will not be silenced. Dr. King once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we see the kinds of violence that is taking place where innocent boys can't just come home from school. You know that justice is not being had. And I, as long as I have breath, will stand with you and the people of Israel to say that we must make sure that those that wish you no good, those who wish that the state of Israel does not exist, those who talk ugliness, until those voices are silenced, we have to stand together. We will work together. We will be together. I know that these deaths cannot be in vain. I know that there has to be a reason that will bring us together so that these young men can rest in peace, because they know it would have brought humanity together. So I urge all within my voice and all those not in my voice, no matter whether you're Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, black, white, we are one. We are all brothers and sisters in the human fight against evil. Let us stand as one. Let us have one voice. Let us make sure that our voices will not be silent until justice, freedom, and peace endures. May God bless the souls of those three young men.
It was a very sad day in Israel. Israel is in a grief today. We are crying all together for the three boys. We are bowing our heads today for the loss of Gilad, Naphtali, and Eyal, who were kidnapped and murdered by cruel terrorists. Our thoughts and prayers are with their brave families. I visited these families on the last couple of weeks at Nof Ayalon, at Talmon, and at Elad. I've met great, brave, and beautiful families. Each of the families showed courage and strength, and I admire their standing against the unknown faith of their boys. Over these days, the whole Israeli community and the whole Jewish people all over the world united behind those families, supported them, and showed the whole world the meaning of the words Kol Israel Achim. We had no other option but to search the Syrian, to arrest terror activities, and to take all required measures in order to find them. We hope to find them alive, but yesterday, as you all know, the bodies were recovered. They recovered in the land of Judea, not on the occupied territories, at Judea. The government of Israel sees this cruel attack over innocent civilians as a direct result of the unity government in the Palestinian Authority, a government that now houses the terror organization of Hamas. It is a terror government. It is a government of terror, and this is the only truth. There is no two truths, and there is no half-truth. There's only one truth. I've said the same things to the Deputy Secretary General of the UN here in New York, with whom I met yesterday. Sadly, I had to inform him of the terrible news and explain the basic right, which is that Israel has to defend itself against any kind of terrorism. We have the right to defend ourselves. We must defend our citizens. Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared clearly that Hamas is responsible and Hamas will pay for its actions. The war on terrorism, unfortunately, is not over yet. We will take all the required measures in order to protect the Israeli citizens. Adonai עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום, יהי זכרם ברוך.
Elected officials, community leaders, dear friends, tonight an entire nation and people are in mourning. The lives of our three sons, Gilad Sha'er, Zichrono Livracha, Eyal Ifrach, Zichrono Livracha, and Naftali Frenkel, Zichrono Livracha, were tragically stolen away from us in an act so heinous, so inhumane, and so deeply painful. Our hearts ache for the families of Gilad, Eyal, and Naftali, and we mourn together as Israelis, as a Jewish people, and as Americans. These three boys, innocent children making their way home from school, like nearly every child does each day, became victims of terrorism when they were targeted, kidnapped, and murdered by Hamas. Tonight, we stand here as one, feeling the devastating loss of three of our own. The families of Eyal, Gilad, and Naftali are joined by all Israelis and communities worldwide, like ours here in New York, in support and mourning. This was a crime against humankind. This was a crime against humankind, a crime that is entrenched in the culture of Palestinian hatred. This culture of death has percolated through generations of hate, generations of violence, generations of terror. People ask me about Israel's possible retaliation. People ask me when this so-called cycle of violence will be broken. To them I say, there is no cycle of violence. A cycle assumes that both sides are equally responsible for the creation of the problem, and therefore they're both equally responsible to resolve it. These murderers' cowardly act by Hamas is the product of a century-old assault on Jewish national sovereignty in the land of Israel. These three boys were taken from us not far from the city of Hebron, a city of great history, but also a place that the Jewish people know all too well as the site of one of the most horrific massacres in our history. On August 24th, 1929, the Jewish minority in Hebron was savagely attacked by a mob of terrorists, resulting in the death of 67 men, women, and children, among them 23 students, just like Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali. These Arab terrorists in Hebron, who in fact were the historical patriarchs of Hamas, attacked our women and children indiscriminately in their beds, schools, and hospital. Sadly, this culture of hatred and destruction continues to poison the hearts of far too many Palestinians, generation after generation. The Palestinian society, however, does not look at the 1929 Hebron massacre as a dark moment in the history of mankind or as a dark moment in their own history. Instead, they glorified and continue to glorify those killers as martyrs. These are their national heroes. One of the deadliest terrorist attacks in Israel's history took place in 1978 when a female terrorist, Dalal Mughrabi, hijacked a bus filled with families on a weekend trip, killing 37 innocent people, many children among them. Within any other society, Dalal Mughrabi would be remembered as a monstrous criminal. But the Palestinian people have turned this terrorist into a celebrated hero and a role model. A public square, school, summer camp, and sport tournament were all named after her. Here in the United States and in Israel, we name our streets for our poets, for our intellectual luminaries, our artists, our athletes, our scientists, our firefighters, our policemen. The Palestinians named their streets and their squares after terrorists and cowards. What does it say about a culture whose national heroes are the likes of Dalal Mughrabi? What kind of culture nurtures terrorism and murderers? Organizations like Hamas continue to corrupt the minds of Palestinian children and cultivate racism, hatred, and bigotry that all too often manifest itself into the violence that took the lives of our 3 boys. Until Palestinian leaders stand up for peace, for acceptance and tolerance, these acts of violence will continue for generations to come. This message of peace cannot only come from the Palestinian leaders. The core of this culture stems from the same place where the rest of us learn to love and to tolerate others. It starts with family. When the mother of Abu Aisha, one of the terrorists who kidnapped Gilad, Eyal, and Naphtali, spoke with Israeli Channel 10 last night, she said of her son, and I quote, "If he did the kidnapping, I'll be proud of him. If he did the kidnapping, I'll be proud of him." In the Wall Street Journal today, Bret Stephens wrote a moving column that shines light on the root of this horrifying culture. Stephens shares stories of Palestinian mothers who speak about encouraging their young sons, teenagers in most cases, to become suicide bombers and celebrating their boys as martyrdom operations. Stephen then raises the question, what kind of society produces such mothers? You won't hear such talk from an Israeli mother, or an American mother, or a mother almost anywhere else in the world. What you hear from Israeli mothers and American mothers today are the sounds of grief and cries over the murder of 3 innocent children. They shed tears for Gilad, Eyal, and Naphtali. Gilad Shaer, Zichrono Livracha, will never be able to travel the world like he had always wanted, or step onto the court for another round of tennis, or cake, bakes, and muffins with his sisters, and will never again create memories with his grandparents. Eyal Ifrach will never be able to travel the world like he had wanted to. The young children who he volunteered with during the last year of his high school will never be able to call on Eyal as a role model or as a friend. Naftali Frenkel will never again be able to play basketball with his friends, never be able to fill his home with the beautiful sound of his guitar, and will never be able to continue his passion for learning. When we send our boys and girls off to school each day, we know that we are sending them to a place of endless opportunities, a place where they go to broaden their perspectives, to challenge their minds, and to discover their true identities. But more importantly, we expect them to come home safely at the end of the day. The world was robbed of these three young souls, and sadly now, we will never know who they could have become. During the 18 days between the time they were kidnapped until the terrible moment yesterday when we learned of their fate, your thoughts, American Jews, the great community of New York, and your prayers were felt throughout Israel. And we thank you for your support and for making your voices heard. Together, we never let the world forget we were missing our boys. As Rabbi Miller mentioned before, the number 18 has a significant meaning in the Jewish tradition. 18, or Chai, means life, as you all know. Your unwavering support during these difficult 18 days, your calls for prayers, your action, and your display of solidarity have given us strength and reassured us that we are not alone. On the 19th day, the 20th day, and for all the days to come, we will forever remember and celebrate the lives of Eyal, Gilad, and Naftali. The late Israeli poet, Natan Yonatan, who sadly knew the pain of losing a child, writes a moving poem entitled "This Big Universe." In it, he describes the changing of the seasons, how nature runs its course and time carries on. But wounds as deep as those created by the loss of a child can never truly heal. One becomes eternally lost. Yonatan closes his poem by saying, "How very desolate and painful this big universe is without him." There are not enough words to comfort that we could offer here today to the families of these three teenagers. For them, there'll never be a good enough explanation for why their sons, their brothers, their cousins are no longer with us. The stories of the lives of Naftali, Eyal, and Gilad should have been filled with many more beautiful chapters and memories. We are here today to assure that their legacies will live on forever. Yehi Zichram Baruch.
I'd like to thank all the public officials and community leaders and distinguished individuals for expressing their support at this difficult hour. Your support means so much to my family in Israel, and you should know that. Before I want to begin, I'd like each of you to take a look into the eyes of each of these boys and to know that behind every face there is an entire personality, is an entire inner world. And those inner worlds are no longer with us. 3 years ago, when I was studying in yeshiva in Israel, I was invited by my great aunt Frida to spend the weekend at her house. My aunt believed the weekend would be a good opportunity for me to
spend some quality time with her grandchildren, my second cousins, who are also spending the weekend at her house. It was then that I met 13-year-old Naftali Franco, the second oldest of 7 children. Naftali left quite an impression with me. He was a good older brother to his younger siblings, and he was a respectful son to his younger parents. Anyone who spent more than 10 minutes with Naftali's family would know that Naftali's role as a good brother to his younger siblings made his parents' lives a lot easier. Most memorably, Naftali was always full of joy, always wearing a smile on his face. He would express this joy when he played music. One of my strongest memories with Naftali was on a Motzei Shabbat on a Saturday night, where the two of us each had our guitars and we were playing guitar together. At the time, Naftali was 13 years old, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, life has such amazing things in store for such a special soul. Earlier this week, we found out that Naftali will never live past the age of 16. As mature as he was for his age, he will never have the experience of blossoming into adulthood, of blossoming into the caring and successful adult he otherwise would have become. He will never get to experience what it is like to fall in love. He will never have children. He will never be able to pass on his love of music to his kids. He will never be able to teach his kids to play guitar. And now when we speak of Naftali, we must use the word was and not the word is. My cousin Naftali is somewhere else right now. He's with God in a place of peace. Over the past few weeks, we have seen the most amazing wave of unity sweep over the Jewish people. Communities across the globe have come together to show their solidarity for these families and to express their hope that the boys come home safely. I cannot tell you how many strangers I have met during the past few weeks who, upon learning that I am Naftali's cousin, extended their arms and gave me the warmest of hugs. The support and solidarity that Jews have offered my family have made me realize that while Naftali is a brother by blood to only some of us, each of the 3 boys is a brother by faith and a brother by culture to all of us. In fact, at this difficult time, if there is one thing that can comfort us, if there is any silver lining to any of this, it is our observation that the global Jewish community today stands more united than it's been in decades. So many people over the past few weeks have dropped what they were doing to spend time every day to raise public awareness about the kidnapping. And when I think about the endless time and energy that was invested in the Bring Back Our Boys campaign, I am filled with never-ending comfort and never-ending gratitude. And yet at this time, we are in the process of accepting the cruel and tough reality that despite the impressive efforts we exerted in the Bring Back Our Boys campaign, our boys never made it home. For many of us, we might be inclined to think that the time and energy that we invested in this noble cause was in vain, that our efforts went to waste. But in the end, our efforts to advance this campaign made people of different walks of life feel so close with each other. This campaign has bolstered our sense of community. It has strengthened our ties with our fellow humans. and it has deepened the wells of compassion that we feel for strangers who are experiencing suffering. In this sense, we as a global community have taken significant strides toward the type of ideal future where a feeling of common humanity and a spirit of interpersonal empathy will triumph over the forces of violence and terrorism. The type of future where the kinds of inhumane acts that killed Eyal, Naftali, and Gilad occur far less frequently. This brings me to the two messages that I would like to share with all of you today as we recover from this great tragedy. Last week, when I spoke at fundraising events and solidarity rallies, of course, on the assumption that these boys were alive, I expressed two messages. First, we must not lose our faith that the boys will come home safely. And second, we must not lose our fervor for supporting these families. In light of the recent events, I would like to communicate updated versions of these two messages. First, we must not let this tragic incident take away our faith in humanity. And second, we must not let this tragic incident take away our fervor for becoming a more unified Jewish people, for becoming a more unified humanity. And I will elaborate briefly on each of these points. First, we must not let this tragic incident take away our faith in humanity. As I mentioned, if there is one thing that we have learned from the past few weeks, it is how quickly communities across the globe can come together to express their solidarity for the families of these murdered children. So many people I've never met before have reached out to me to support me and my family. The experience has reinforced my conviction that common humanity, as was mentioned before, that common humanity can unite us all. That if we only begin to tap into the wells and wells of empathy each of us store in our heart, we can build a better tomorrow. That if we begin to put ourselves in the shoes of others who are going through suffering, that we can create a world that is free from such tragedies. And in this sense, in a very paradoxical way, this tragic episode has only strengthened my faith in humanity. Second, we must not let this tragic incident take away our fervor for becoming a more unified Jewish community and a more unified community of humans across the world. Indeed, what has helped my family get through this difficult time was the waves and waves of support that we have received from strangers across the globe who are empathizing with our pain and telling us that we are not alone. As I have learned personally from the countless phone calls and emails I have received in the past 2 days, such waves of support are instrumental in helping any individual cope with tragedy. And it's instrumental in helping any individual to emerge from tragedy an even stronger person than he or she was before. To conclude, I wanted to share one more thought that for many of us, when these really bad things happen, especially when it's personal and it's our family members and it's so close to home, we often ask, what is the higher purpose of all of this? And sometimes we choose to ignore that question, but it's often on our minds, and we think, what is the good that comes from this evil? And the more I've thought about it, at the end of the day, it's up to us whether this tragedy has a higher purpose. It's up to us whether good comes from this bad. If we choose to be inspired, if we choose to be moved by this disturbing incident and to commit ourselves to building a better world where such incidents, such tragic incidents, are less likely to occur, then we become the higher purpose. We become the good that comes from the bad. I know that if Naftali was given the privilege of living past the age of 16, he would have been such a force for good in this world. but he was denied this privilege. And in his memory, we should each strive to be the force of good in this world that Naphtali was never allowed to be. Thank you, and may the memories of these three boys only be a blessing.
במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרוקיע מאירים ומזהירים אסנישמוס שלושת נערי ישראל קדושים וטהורים יעקב נפתלי בן רחל דבורה ואברהם רון גלעד מיכאל בן בת גלים ואופיר אייל בן איריס תשורה ואורי שנחטפו נהרגו ונרצחו בדם קר על ידי מחבלים ארורים יימח שמם קדושת השם ייקום דמם ארץ אל תכסי דמם בגן עדן בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם לכן בלהו רחמים יסתירם בסייסר כנופה ולעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים אס נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום וינוחו בשלום וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר
Please remain standing for a moment of silent reflection in memory of Eyal, Gilad, and Naphtali, and then we'll conclude our program as Chazan Mueller will sing, and we should join him in the singing of Hatikva, the hope.
כל עוד בלבב פנימה נפש יהודי הומיה ולפתי מזרח קדימה עין לציון Sophia, O de la vida tikvatenu, hatikva bachnot alpayim, liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Yerushalayim, liotam chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion, Yerushalayim.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.